biosecurity and product integrity. Sarah, did you want to lead off there?
Yes.
Chair, just before the honourable member asks the question, could I just introduce Ray Burrows, who's come to the table? Ray is the General Manager of Biosecurity Tasmania.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, I just wanted to go to the small hive beetle incursion.
Yeah.
And if you could just talk through for the committee the process of when the first incursion was detected and what happened from that date on in terms of hive inspections.
So Tasmania really does have a world-class biosecurity system, and it's never been better equipped to protect our state's health, industry and unique environment from pests and diseases. And this has been achieved through legislative change with the passing of the Biosecurity Act 2019 and funding initiatives including securing our borders. The recent detection of small hive beetle. Actually, I'm just going to take a step back. My information's about the second detection.
Yes.
Can you up to the first detection?
I think we can.
What date was that?
I'm just checking.
I think I might refer this straight to Ms Burrows, who was actually led our response team to the detection of the small hive beetle, the first detection.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ms Burrows.
Thank you, Minister, and through you. The first detection of the detection of the first small hive beetle in East Devonport was around about, and I haven't got the exact date in front of me, but it was March. It was early March. As soon as we found that, it was actually found in a guard hive, and I'm not sure whether you're aware, but Tasmania has a set of surveillance hives around the whole state. Some of them are paid for by the Commonwealth, and they're called surveillance hives, and some of them are paid for by the Tasmanian government, which are guard hives. So this particular small hive beetle was found in a guard hive quite close to the East Devonport TT line terminal. As soon as that happened and was confirmed as a small hive beetle, we put in place a 15-kilometre biosecurity risk management area. And we started checking every single hive within that 15-kilometre area from that point. How we did it had a set of concentric zones, I suppose. So we started checking the hives in the 10 to 15-kilometre, 5 to 10, and then 0 to 5. So we were going really well. It got to towards the end of April and we hadn't found any more small hive beetle, and we thought, you beauty, this one's come on the ferry and jumped into a guard hive and we've missed a crisis. But we found another one about probably 1.4 kilometres away from the first finding, and interestingly probably about 500 metres away from the TT line terminal, but on the other side of the first finding. By then we'd actually checked all the hives in that 10-kilometre, all the registered hives, all the recreational and commercial beehives. So we started to check the bee colonies, the wild bee colonies, and that's the point we're at now. We've reduced the biosecurity risk management zone to a 10-kilometre zone, and we are now working with the community to find every single wild colony we possibly can. I'm very proud to say that my staff have door-knocked about more than 1,000 houses in that particular zone, asking for people to keep their eyes open, don't approach. They've also worked with the schools in the local area and similar sorts of things. So wild bee colonies are now our focus, and we've developed a PCR test so that with those wild bee colonies, as you can appreciate, some of them are quite high up in the trees or might be in people's walls or whatever. We've developed a PCR test so we can actually get a scraping and have a reasonable understanding of whether or not small hive beetle is there or not.
Okay. Minister, can I just go back to early March, the first beetle was detected in that guard hive, and you said from when it was confirmed there was a risk management area set up, and then by the end of April there had been no more, all of them had been checked and no more found. But can I just get a bit more of an idea of that timeline between that first detection? So first detection to when it was confirmed, so that timeline, and then the establishment of that risk area. And you mentioned there were sort of concentric circles, I guess, perimeters, when each of those had been checked by?
We certainly can. I think it was pretty phenomenal to watch our biosecurity team spring into action. Very, very quickly there was a command centre established, which I jumped straight in a car and raced up and had a look at, and which was absolutely superb. And so I think for the detailed aspects of that, I'll hand to Ms Burrows. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, and through you. The formal confirmation of the small hive beetle, it took 3 days. The PCR, unfortunately, as you're probably aware, PCR test does take a little time, but we were 90% sure that it was a small hive beetle. They're a fairly distinctive beastie. And our entomologists were quite sure, but the confirmation came 3 days later. But by then we'd already set up the incident management team. We set it up at our Stony Rise offices, and we immediately had the whole team in place. So operations planning, incident controller and so forth. And I'm very pleased to say that there was some sharing of resources across parks, for example, and EPA. They came in and helped us as well. As far as your question about when each of the zones the surveillance on each was completed, I have to say I don't know the exact dates, but suffice it to say we had done all the hives in the 10 to 0 kilometre before that second small hive beetle was found, which was the beginning of May. 2nd of May, I think it was, in fact. So we'd done all of those.
Do you know how many hives there were in that zone?
Yes, I've actually got...
Sorry, through you, Minister.
Excuse me, Minister, through you, I apologise.
Has she got that?
Yeah, I think you've got it.
I've got the figures here. We've actually done 2,637 inspections since the initial detection. We've done an intense inspection of 777 hives. So even though there was probably only, I do have that, we've got only 128 registered beekeepers in that particular zone. As you can probably appreciate, because registration of beekeepers was a fairly recent requirement, it was November last year, we're still having people that hadn't registered. So we only had 100 people registered, now 128.
Is that across the state or in that zone?
Just in that zone, I think. Yeah. And what's the trigger then between, so you had the 2,637 inspections, 777 intense inspections. What's the trigger for an intense inspection?
Through you, Minister. An intense inspection are on the high-risk ones, for example, if they were in close proximity, physical proximity to the original hive where we found the small hive beetle. They would be subject to an intense inspection. And in fact, the ones that were immediately adjacent, we closed them up and put them in a freezer, and actually hired a freezer van to actually take it down from Stony Rise down to our entomology labs in Launceston. So the idea of freezing, obviously you close the hive, freeze it, so you start to euthanise the bees because our entomologists need to get in and actually have a really good look, pull it apart pretty much. Yep. And that's what we're also doing with the wild colonies that we can actually access as well. There's a limited number, same thing. We close them up, and that might mean spraying that magic, what's that thing's called?
I don't know.
I don't know. Closing them up in some way, shape or form.
Agent.
Yeah, it is something like that, and then putting it in a freezer, taking it back so our entomologists can have a good look at it. So that's intensive. The traps are actually deployed we've deployed how many traps? 456 traps within the hives. Most of the traps actually fit underneath the the business end of the hive, so you can actually take those traps out without opening the hive. So that's a less intense.
So how many bees would have died as a result of this?
Well, I was about to say, yeah, what do we know what the impact of this on the bee population in Tasmania would be?
Through you, Minister. It's very difficult to assess. We haven't killed a whole lot of bees in the recreational and commercial hives that we've checked to date. However, I'll be upfront, the wild colonies we are having to euthanize. It's not easy otherwise.
And is that just within a radius? Yeah. Is that
Within
the
the 10
10 kilometres?
Radius.
Yeah.
So did you close them up during the day when a lot of the bees were out, or during the night when they're all home?
We would close, because we were lucky in a lot of respects, the weather was cooling down anyway, so the bee activity was actually reducing quite significantly. But yes, you're right, the closing up would happen when the bees were back into the hives at the early part of the season, but now, as I say, they're
They're
mostly...
inside, they're home anyway. Too cold to go out. Sarah?
It can be really devastating for beekeepers. Some love their bees.
And bees, beautiful bees.
But through you, Minister, if you look at what the impacts could be.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, that's
of
even more
course.
devastating.
Yeah, that's right.